It is a real pleasure to be here with you and speak about my experience in architecture in Jerusalem and in Israel, and it's especially a great pleasure to talk to you in this school after the wonderful experience that I hear that Stan Mendelsohn and his group has had in Israel during their trip on the Golden Crescent. So I think that some of you are familiar with the landscapes and the context that I will be talking about. The main subject of my talk today will be the response of architecture to context. It is my understanding and my belief and the guideline of my practice that contexts actually create richer environments. Context can be of variety of types. They can be climatological contexts. Harsh climate affects design. Variety of scenes, topography, soil types affect the design. Sociological context, the type of families towards which the design is aiming, have strong effect on the way that design is created. The built heritage, the history, the past, and its effect on the built environment shape the way that architecture is created. And any time that architect is overlooking the context, his chance to create good quality of architecture is reduced. Now, the variety of contexts are universal. You have sociological context, you have history, you have climate in each site. But the combination of the variety of contexts for each site is unique. And by the response of the architecture to the contextual conditions of each site, make it specific, and in that case, make it unique. Our country, Israel, is a small country, but we are lucky to have a variety of contexts in all those that I have mentioned. Although this country is not more than 100 miles broad and not more than 500 miles long, we have 4 or 5 different climatic conditions. From the Mediterranean to the hot desert, and we have the mountainous area. So the climate has strong effect on the design. Sociological context also affects our design tremendously. There are different social groups, there are different religious backgrounds, each one affecting the procedure in which design is taking place. And there is a large history that's been going on for over 4,000 years of continuous building in our country. So whenever you build, you find some artifacts of the past, and that affects the design. So I would like to show you a couple of projects that I've been working in the last 10 years, and I'll refer in specifics to this issue of context and its effect on the design. May I have the slide, please? Could I have it? Oh, I can. Thank you. Jerusalem is a walled city. The western part is Mediterranean, and as you go to the east, you are going to the desert. It's a walled city of about 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer, and in the center, to the east, you have the Temple Mount. air view shows the Dome of the Rock, which is most sacred Muslim temple, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus is believed to have been born, is buried, and the Wailing Wall. Between them, you have a mixture of housing, markets, all of them mixing together into a wonderful mosaic of different types of buildings, different architectural forms. All of them are different, but all of them become together as part of a built environment that fits together all its different segments. Religious feelings are very strong in our city, like the Franciscan rituals at the beginning of the Via Dolorosa, or the Muslim prayers on the Temple Mount during the Ramadan, or the Jewish congregation in front of the Wailing Wall. So the overall view of the city is a combination of different architectural styles, different periods. The Temple Mount was built in the 6th century. This building was built in the 19th century. This is Muslim. This is Russian Orthodox. And we have an environmental context that is sometimes referred to as a mosaic. More often we think of it as ethnic goulash. Jerusalemites are very ecocentric, and they tend to think that they are in the center of the world, getting influences both from Europe, from Africa, and from Asia. Luckily, you have the ocean in between, so America doesn't fit into this formula. Jerusalem is also a city which is built entirely out of stone. And this is a picture of the old city wall, and you can see stones that were built during Second Temple time. You see Herodian, which is the Jesus period, and then you can see stones that are built in the 15th century. So you have layering of architectural elements along a long period of over 2,000 years within one single architectural element. And you have these contrasts of climates. Coming to Jerusalem from the east, you're actually going through desert area. It's extremely arid, about 3 to 10 inches of rain, while coming from the west, you're coming through a Mediterranean climate. Both climates meet at the ridge of where Jerusalem is located, very narrow and thin ridge that has to articulate contrasts within its city limits. And another aspect of the various contexts affecting design in Jerusalem is the superposition or overlayering of different historic periods. This is one of the entrances to the old city of Jerusalem, a magnificent creation by a Muslim Ottoman architect, Sinan, from the 16th century. Now this gate to the old city is built on top of a Roman gate. Here you see a reconstruction of the Roman gate, that only one gate, the left gate, is left. So you have within the city layering of different architectural periods within the same site, and the city and the construction in the city is experienced simultaneously, viewing buildings from different periods. And I also brought with me 2 slides. This is from the markets in the old city, and this is from a pedestrian mall in the new part of Jerusalem, just to show you that there is also normal life in Jerusalem and not only religious and historic contexts. Now, I will show you a series of projects that I have been associated with. And the first one is a small project that I'm working on the design now. One part of it is built, and it's located right here. It's St. Stephen's Gate, the entrance to the old city from the east. The Temple Mount being here, and the entire walled city is here. This is the entrance to the Via Dolorosa, the sacred religious pilgrim route that brings believers, Christian believers, from the Mount of Olives to the Golgotha, to the place where Jesus is believed to have been born, to have been buried. Historically, the site along which the Via Dolorosa is taking place used to be a pool, a place where water was collected in the arid, dry conditions of Jerusalem. The project that we designed is this one, and we tried to find a design form that will accentuate the pilgrim's route along the Via Dolorosa, defining spaces where the pilgrims can gather together, get organized, and proceed with the procession. And we try to do it with only stone, and we try to do it with aesthetic guidelines that make the project as simple as possible and as relating as possible to different religious, historic references. Another view, this is the St. Stephen's Gate, the entrance to the old city, and this is a photograph from a site nearby during a procession on Good Friday. The project continues. This was built 5 years ago, and we are continuing now construction on this part, which is the entrance to the Temple Mount from here. And we are working on a stone garden that will define axis of movement towards the Temple Mount, axis of movement that respect minaret that exists here, and a few more entrances that allow people to come from the old city into the Temple Mount. Doing so by restoring this sense of pool within the gates. Now, to build in Jerusalem, you have to start either very young or to expect a long life, because projects take a long period of time. We've been working on this project for 7 or 8 years, and we have been recently commissioned to design a promenade that will connect the gate, St. Stephen's Gate, with another gate that enters the city from the south. And I assume it will take maybe 5, maybe 10 years more. Design process is very long. We have many groups that have something to say on the project, will modify it, and we think it's correct. It's such a sensitive site, such a complicated, both historic, religious, and human situation, that we think that this reviewing process is correct. A project that we have completed recently on the other side of the old city. This is the western wall of the old city, is on a pool which is located here. It used to be a quarry for the construction of the Temple Mount and the construction of the old city walls. By digging the stones from here, they created a place where water could be reservoir of water, and this also improved the defensibility of the old city. It has been a water reservoir for a long period of time, and after the city was connected to pipes and pumps, it became a cattle market for quite a long while, and it is now incorporated as part of the national park around the old city of Jerusalem. Now, this is a project that is designed to be an open-air amphitheater. And we integrated within this pool a stage with rehearsal rooms underneath, storage, and electroacoustic command. And we try to do it in a way that it will be articulated with the rock around it. So we used, in fact, hardly any concrete, just for the ceiling, and we used heavy stones, 2.5 tons, some of them are weighing, without any cement, as a rock object within the pool. Sometimes we left for the steps of the people coming into the pool, we left the joints open so that the grass is actually growing in the joints and making these steps as part of the open-air amphitheater. Now, with the acoustic shell, we had a completely different problem. We had to design a shell which is temporary. It's only for the summer. And by being temporary shell, we thought that we could use structure and form that are in contrast with the environment. While the permanent elements are articulated with the environment, we thought that the temporary elements could be in contrast with the old city, creating a transparent structure through which the environment could be perceived. We used the Mero system for this project and specially designed acoustic reflective elements and joints. Now I'll go and take this back. Okay. The public is sitting on the grass and on the rocks, and this is the acoustic shell just before the performance. And that's how it looks during a concert of about 15,000 people this site can attend. It is put up each April and taken down every October. And I feel very pleasant about a structure that is going up in the spring and going down in the autumn, and it is full of activity as long as there is program. When there will be no program for a year, so just the stone will be part of this national park. Whenever there is program, this structure is functioning. Another project that I will show is in a new neighborhood in Jerusalem. If this is the old city of Jerusalem, this is the Ridge Road going from Bethlehem to the north. This is the road coming from the Dead Sea and the desert to the Mediterranean. One of the neighborhoods that were designed in recent years is the neighborhood of Ramot. We have been associated with a larger team of architects and planners of the entire area, and we specifically worked on the design of a couple of perimeter blocks. In the first sketches, we tried to capture this relationship between open space and built form, defining those perimeter blocks that are different in size, some of them creating larger spaces, some of them creating narrow alleys. We tried to learn from the textual context of the old city that has a very articulate way of defining public open spaces. And the final scheme designed by a colleague of mine of the entire area incorporates about 2,000 dwelling units, part of them apartment blocks and part of them are ground attached dwellings. I will show you a project that we designed. It is these two perimeter blocks. It's part of this scheme where we wanted to define the perimeter block with the housing and create the internal courtyards that integrate parking and semi-public open space. And we have them in each one of these courtyards. These were actually built, and we were very conscious of the difference between the internal space, which is semi-public. The entrances are from here to all the different apartments. The parking is here. The garden is here. While on the outside, you have the living rooms and the more public functions of the apartments. This is how the building looks from outside, and this how it looks from inside with the walk-ups, parking, and green open space. There are 100 dwelling units. Practically, there were about 15 different housing types, but all of them have in common terrace, which is about 100 square feet in size, and it has 2 to 3 bedrooms and living rooms around it. So this is actually the focal point of the dwelling, as you can see it at all levels. Another project, this one in Tel Aviv, was part of a large national scheme of a design within dilapidated areas. There are about 60 neighborhoods in Israel that were decided to be substandard, and a whole series of measurements were taken in order to improve housing condition, to enlarge the apartments, and to improve both the public facilities and the environmental quality of the streets. We have gone through a series of public meetings of the 20 to 30 residents of each street. There were about 70 streets of this, and we were involved in the design of 3 of them. And we tried to find the architectural language that will unite different housing types, but at the same time give identity to each one separate. And one more aspect to it is the streets are very narrow, sometimes less than 15 feet apart. Cars are going through, and we thought that there is no place for separate parking in each block. And that's where we worked out on a development of integrated urban streets that have both parking and drive-through. In these narrow streets, it's possible to do it, and thus create a rather more balanced relationship between the car and the pedestrian. Now, entirely different context in our design is our experience in the Israeli desert. Projects that I've shown you before are in Jerusalem here. This is the Sinai Peninsula, which is Egypt. This is the Dead Sea, which is believed to be the lowest point on Earth. And the Israeli desert is this area. Although quite small, between Jerusalem and the Red Sea, there is about 200 miles. This area has Mediterranean climate, which is hot and humid. We have the valley area, which is extremely hot both in the summer and the winter, and it's very dry. We have the plains, which is quite cold during the winter and warm during the summer, and the mountainous area, which is very cold during the winter, and it's quite pleasant during the summer. This is not part of Israel. It's the tip, southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. It's extremely high area, of about 7,000 to 8,000 feet, and it's a very cold desert. This is the kind of landscape that you can see during winter and the rest of the year. And being in Albuquerque, I feel very comfortable with this kind of landscape, which reminds me quite a lot of Israel. Now, this is several sketches that we did in the Institute for Desert Research, trying to identify house types, clusters, and segments of settlement that will respond to different climatic conditions. And we thought that each housing type and each cluster type should respond to the specific climatic conditions of Israeli climates. Now, this one is an extroverted housing type that opens to all directions, has windows to all directions. Wind can go through, and it can go through the entire cluster. And this is the kind of structure that we thought is suitable for humid areas where ventilation is appreciated. While the other extreme of introverted housing types, with all the windows open to the inside, rather closely attached units that create a cluster that has clearly defined alleys and rather minimal exposure to the sun, is a better climatic response to areas where there is high radiation, where there are windstorms, when there is wish to be protected from the winds. And this was the kind of studies that we were conducting in order to find the proper building form and settlement structure that respond to different climatic conditions. And we made a whole series of transformations between the extremely extroverted housing type to the extremely introverted housing type at different orientations. We went through a series of studies in different climatic regions, like an Algerian prototype house that is protected with berms against the storm, and this very same housing type repeated in an Algerian village to create a rather dense structure of community with narrow alleys, almost always shadowed, and the same type is repeated here to create an urban structure. We looked at the Greek house that no matter where it is located in this city, the entrance being from south or from north, the patio is always facing south. And the arcade is always around the patio, so that you get radiation during the winter when the sun is low, and you get shade in this arcade during the summer. And we looked at some wonderful experience in the United States of these buildings that are exposing their envelope to absorb radiation. This is from Taos. And we looked also at Pueblo Bonito, which I think is one of the best schemes that responds to climatic conditions. It is protected from the north by this 5-story high wall. It's exposed to the south, and it, by its volume, defines the public open space of the public and ceremonial activities. And we looked at some of the experiments that Ralph Eskin was doing in a completely different climate, but it has the same form, the same response to climatic conditions that we thought has universal characteristics. And we looked at our own built heritage. This is Nabatean structures. It's an entire city and a prototype house of desert dwellers in Israel that lived 400 BC to 600 AD. And they have this same similar pattern of winding, narrow alleys, very well protected from the elements, from wind, from radiation, very clear definition of the edge of the settlement, which was of course done for protection purposes, but once it existed, it gave very good climatic response. And the patio house with arcade on the western part of the patio, facing east and facing south, in such a way that winter sun hits the building while the arcade creates shade during the summer. On the basis of these observations, we started about 10 years ago with an experimental project that was done in Sde in the Institute for Desert Research. And this was a joint project of our unit, the Desert Architecture Unit, and the unit of solar calculations, applied solar calculations unit that David Gover, Dr. Gover was part of that unit, and we had a wonderful collaboration. The first building that was designed and built out of this collaboration was a single family experimental house. We tried to use as little openings as possible towards the unpleasant environment to the west and to the north, where strong winds are coming, and occasionally we have sand and dust storms. The majority of the openings were to the south, direct gain to the living room, clear story window that will hit this northern room, and a very interesting invention that was developed by Dr. Feynman and Dr. Gover, which is actually a kinetic trombe wall. There are prisms that can rotate. One side is insulated, the other side is absorbing, and the third one is neutral, can be colored in which color the dweller wants. And it is rotated to absorb heat during the winter, and when it's rotated again, it radiates the heat into the house. That's in the winter. In the summer, it has the reverse effect. It has the insulated light color towards the outside to reflect the heat, and during the night, it is rotated to reflect its heat outside and get cooled. Here is David Feynman looking at the northern room, south-facing wall, which was colored dark to serve as a heat absorber of the radiation from the clear story. This is the heat storage on the northern wall, getting from the clear story direct radiation. This is the kinetic trombe wall from the inside. And this is the trombe wall, kinetic rotating prism in both situations. This house turned to be very successful, both in terms of its energy performance and in terms of the pleasance of the people living there. Had very convenient experiences with that. Apart of one thing that we didn't take into consideration, that it became extremely successful, and it had a couple of thousand of visitors every year, and people lost their privacy due to that interest. There have been a couple of television programs on this building, and we were wondering what would be a right way of solving the problem of privacy. And this came about the same time where David Feynman and his group were trying to make this prism's kinetic wall simplified. They were too heavy when they were the entire wall high. And this is a phase-changing material in these tubes. One side colored black, the other side colored white. And actually, they serve as the same function as the kinetic prism wall, improving even further the performance of this building through the direct gain from the southern window. This building has been very carefully monitored, and we have here results from December '82, when the minimum temperature went down to freezing point, and it was about 55 degrees Fahrenheit maximum temperature, while on the inside, the temperature stayed almost steady between 60-65 during the winter, a fluctuation of between 1 and 3 degrees. During the summer, temperature went up to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but the temperature inside remained quite pleasant during the entire summer. The energetic performance of this building was extremely successful. A building of the similar size in the vicinity will cost about $1,000 per winter to heat, while this one was, believe it or not, less than $20 per winter, which was very promising. After this experience of this experimental house, we were commissioned in our office in Jerusalem to design an educational center very close to the building that we've just seen. It's also close to a place where our first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion, is buried. And it is actually an extension of a promenade next to his tomb. It's located within this landscape on this tip of a valley coming down. Our site was located here, and we were lucky to have a situation where the education center that had auditorium, library, 3 classrooms, exhibition area, and offices facing due south. Well, we organized the site plan in such a way that this is due south, entrance from the north, and we used here both direct gain and earth berming to try to modify the fluctuations of temperature between winter and summer and between night and daytime. So the topography is somewhere around here. It was partially excavated below ground and partially burned, with a open-air studying facility in front of the various classrooms, an amphitheater here, and the promenade that leads to the tomb of Ben-Gurion. This is how the building looks from the north, the earth berming, the entrance, clear story windows, the amphitheater facing south, and the open-air study area. Towards the south, we located these pergolas in such a way that winter sun will come through while summer sun will stay away. This was based on a shading study that we did in the desert architecture unit, where we tried to elaborate a geometry that will do exactly that, allow the low winter sun to penetrate and will block the high summer sun. This was a prototype of this shading device that was extremely successful from its geometric performance, but it was quite fragile. So we had to simplify it in our project. In that prototype, we had this winter shading, autumn and spring shading, and summer shading. And this is from the winter, autumn and spring, and summer shading pattern. And here you see it in the building. During the winter, almost the entire southern facade is exposed to the sun that is coming through the pergola, while during the summer, you get this shaded area. More than that, we wanted, through these pergolas, to frame the landscape and establish a dialogue, a relationship between the building and its environment that is more than just an energy-saving device, but rather a design approach that makes the buildings part of the landscape rather than something which is transplanted on top of it. Some more views of the exit to the amphitheater. One more aspect of the building is its construction method. This is an architectural presentation of the building, while its actual section is presented here. Due to soil conditions, the highest strata of the ground that we could use was about 30 feet below ground. So we had to have piles that go to this bearing strata. It's about 30 feet deep. We have 80 of these foundations, and this creates a contact with the ground of about 1,500 square meters, which is 15,000 square feet of contact area between the building and the ground around it, which means that we have extremely good contact with the ground at the average annual temperature. So these foundations have a cooling effect during the summer, and they have heating effect during the winter. To what extent this effect affects the building, David Feynman is now making the exact calculations, but we assume that it is something between 2 to 3 degrees, both in the winter and in the summer. The clear story, giving light during the winter and summer, but has heating effect during the winter. And we located local stones within the building of different geological formations. We were very pleased to find out that this building is not only visited by students and scholars, but also wildlife is quite frequently visiting this site, and it gave us a very pleasant feeling that this site is accepted by its environment. Now I'll show a couple of projects that are during construction period, doing construction now, and some of them are still in the, on the drawing boards. This is a project to be built by the Lake of Gennesaret in Tiberias. And it's a shrine, a mausoleum of a saint that is believed to have performed miracles. Well, in Israel, if you don't believe in miracles, you're not realist. You have to believe in miracles. And this place is very popular. There is annual festival here. About 20,000 people come, but it's visited all over the year around. Now, as you approach the site, this does not exist at the moment. There is only the place where he is buried. So as you approach, we developed a design concept that the walls that define this plaza are directed towards the tomb, so that when you come towards the tomb, you practically have no visual contact with the perimeter, with the landscape around. But as you come out, the landscape opens for the pedestrian, for the person coming from the tomb. And we are very interested in this relationship with the landscape, with this relationship of the person looking at the landscape and what is the right architectural formation of this relationship. Rear view, this is more ceremonial, where a large number of people can stay here. Well, this is more human entrance, if you want, or more secular entrance, where people can have picnics and spend there maybe an afternoon. And this is some photographs from the inside. Now, the last project I will show you, it is not built yet. It's on the drawing table, and it was a design competition that we won for a solar community in the Israeli desert. It is to be located in a small town which is just by the largest crater. This is the crater over here. This is the town of Mitzpe Ramon, and our site is right here. It's located 3,000 feet above sea level. This is a summer photo. This is a winter photo. We have rather pleasant summer and quite cold winter, strong winds, high radiation, and the site is sloping west, northwest, and southwest. Not very good orientation for a solar project. We had to look at the sun trajectory, the wind, the temperatures, and we found out that this site is exposed to western winds. It's exposed to the afternoon sun during the summer. It has this movement of the sun during the winter and this movement of the sun during the summer. Together with a physicist from the Institute of Technology, Dr. Hoffman, we calculated that we need 5 hours of exposure to the sun to get the building heat during the entire day, during the entire winter. We used some of Ralph Noll's methods of defining the solar envelope, and we figured out that we need to start heating the building at 9:30 in the morning and finish heating it at 2:30 in the afternoon. And this will give us the solar envelope of the building within which any volume of building which is built here does not cast shadow on the buildings behind it. We devised a very simple tool of solar dimension modulator that defines buildings at height of 3-story, 2-story, and 1-story high buildings that during these critical hours between 9:30 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon will cast this shadow. This is 9:30 in the morning. This is 12 o'clock at noon. For a flat terrain, this will be the length of the shadow. If the terrain is facing south, the shadows, of course, are shorter. And if the terrain is facing north, the shades are longer. Okay. So we took a 3-story and 2-story high building and we found its shading pattern. This is the morning shade, the noon shade, and the afternoon shade. And we also try to organize our flats in such a way that the major bedrooms, living rooms, dining rooms are facing south, and this is the pattern of radiation during morning, noon, and afternoon. And this is the shading of ground-attached building. This is the shade pattern of 2 to 3 story high buildings. This was a very convenient tool to start clustering the buildings. So we had the 2 to 3 story high buildings, and we had the ground-attached buildings. And we spaced them in such a way that in no situation during these 5 hours, between 9:30 and 2:30, this building does not cast shadow on that building. Of course, with a ground-attached low-rise, the distances are smaller than in this case. But we made sure that during these 5 hours, no south elevation is actually exposed. And after that, it was quite a pleasant architectural experience to actually cluster the buildings. We created those cluster patios that get shade and exposure to the sun, whatever we wanted. In the summer, it's good to have shade. In the winter, it's good to have exposure to the sun. We located the entrances from the west. We put the high buildings towards the west, so the long shadow will be cast on the parking lots and on the road. And we have internal alleys as well as a pergola leading from all the different clusters into the main neighborhood plaza. Some heliodon studies of 9:30 in the morning with exposure to the sun. We had a sundial here in the middle of the square, and this is noon exposure. Some sections of different housing types. We used solar balconies in front of the south elevation, and this is the pergola that connects the different clusters. This is a view from the pergola towards the entrance with rather highly exposed or highly perforated southern facade and no openings on the west facade. Well, this is in focus, and this is taken during a dust storm in Israel, and we had to try and find out how to integrate the landscaping of the neighborhood with the entire design. And we looked at some kibbutzim, these are cooperative settlements in the neighborhood, and we found out that if this is the desert, the settlers in the kibbutzim very cleverly encircled the kibbutz with a thick row of eucalyptus that serve as dust filters. Inside the kibbutz, there is heavily grassed areas so that dust cannot float, and there are those bushes that create a secondary barrier around the buildings. So we thought that these are good landscape design principles that improve housing conditions in extremely hostile climatic environment. And we made furthermore studies of understanding what should be the actual edges of the settlement. And we tried to put these studies into the site design. For example, facing west, we put evergreens that will block the western radiation during the summer. There are also some berms here that reduce the effect of dust storms. There are deciduous trees facing south, and there are creepers and vines on the pergolas. So we try to incorporate landscape and gardening design principles into the overall design. Now, just to come back for a moment to Jerusalem, I'll show you one small project, which is actually a fountain facing the walls of the old city. It's located right here. This is the old city of Jerusalem. This is the new city of Jerusalem. And there is a whole series of paths that link the new city to the old city, and they are going through this little fountain in which we thought we could incorporate the stone and the water and the play of lights to a rather simple design. And I would like to conclude this talk with some observations of design process in Jerusalem. I am a member of a body of 12 people that sit in a board of a district committee in Jerusalem that approve or disapprove any major project which is under construction in Jerusalem. And our municipality has built a major model. It's the size of this room of the entire city, into which every new project is integrated in the model and then discussed whether it will be appropriate to build it or not. These buildings were built before the model was built, and this design process or design evaluation process was actually implemented. And our mayor, who is a formidable fellow, used to say that architects die and buildings remain, and sometimes he would have liked it to be the other way around. Thank you very much.